Thank you for joining us for the second annual Global Summit, Global Kidney Innovations, Expanding Patient Choices and Outcomes, a collaborative partnership event presented by the American Association of Kidney Patients and the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Hi, I'm Iya Bikondo Granatella, and I am a professor and small business owner. I have managed kidney disease for 31 years as a chronic kidney disease patient and 15 years as a transplant recipient. I am honored to serve AAKP as an ambassador for the state of New Jersey. Being an advocate, AAKP has given me a platform and has amplified my voice. I am able to stand in the gap of other kidney patients and kidney healthcare providers. Through AAKP, I have learned the value of the patient voice and experience and its impact on the positive evolution and advancement of care in the kidney community. Today, I am pleased to introduce to you Shahid Muhammad, a chartered and academic scientist and professional doctorate in biomedical sciences, candidate under the University of the West of England. Mr. Muhammad is also co-founder of the Renal Patient Support Group. He will present on clinical trials in kidney disease, international perspective on patient engagement. We appreciate Mr. Muhammad for taking the time to share insights on clinical trials in kidney disease and how timely research and innovation can improve patient lives and society.
Thank you to the American Association of Kidney Patients for inviting me to present on this topic about an international perspective on patient engagement, involvement in clinical trials. My name is Shahid Mohammed, and I'm a chartered scientist under the University of West of England, UK. Bristol, UK, and it's great to be here on this international platform to present on this very hopefully important and enlightening topic. So to begin with, I wanted to provide an overview or contents of what we'll be talking about and what this presentation will be about. So to highlight really, I'm going to provide a bit of background about the overall subject, then a little bit about clinical trials and what are they all about and what they're about, a bit about patient involvement and patient-centeredness when it comes to clinical trials and involvement, co-developing trials, which is something that's been in media and around clinical trials for a while, but it's about actually having a bit more dialogue, how this can be improved. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. A bit of focus on implementing guidelines and what guidelines should look like or have around them. What should best practice look like? A little bit about the UK Renal Trials Network, which is still quite a new network, but very involved around clinical trials and patients in kidney disease. A bit about ownership and empowerment and how patients and professionals are in need to work together to ensure that both are building up their understanding of each other's mutual goals. A bit about the SWOT framework, and I'll get into that, and some recommendations, conclusions, and I'll just have a slide on some further reading and references. So to begin with, the background here, just 4 key themes really to kick us off. We have something around co-developing, and what does that really mean? Well, co-developing is basically where patient involvement and engagement is important, and both professionals and patients need to work together according and get understanding according to the type of trial. Having an understanding around setting and having shared principles and mutual goals and objectives. That's quite key, and that would be a key understanding throughout this presentation. Conducting and assessing, well, those who do know a little bit about clinical trials or those are still learning will have to sort of understand and appreciate that throughout different focuses within clinical trials, there's a need for auditing and understanding the measuring of quality. So trialists need to have a streamlined data collection process or processes to assess outcomes, ensuring research and trial investment is really actually for patient benefit and best practice. So that's very important. Reporting quality and implementing. So trialists should have appropriate dissemination plans, example through networks, medical and clinical teams. And this needs to be made clear from the outset of any proposed clinical trial, whether that's medically or device related or otherwise focused around patient care. Continuous evaluations falls under this category as well. Impact and evaluation is another key area. So this is about measuring short and long-term outcomes of any trials. Impact evaluation is basically in the main about focusing on weighing up best practice with safety and the economics. COVID-19, for example, we hear a lot in the media around the proposals for vaccinations. So you can understand that economics plays a big role around understanding how clinical trials are important. So this slide just really quite simply summarizes what clinical trials are all about. They're in effect, there are 4 phases. So phase 1 is basically where you might have based on a particular goal or objective, trialists might have a small group of people involved, and these will be those people that they are wanting to pilot an investigation on, or pilot an intervention or a device around, or even an app. And they have only a small amount of people, so something in the lines of between 20 and 80 people. And then phase 2 of the trial is actually involving a larger group of people, and it's almost to try and replicate the results or understanding around what was done in phase 1, but obviously in a bigger group of people, something in the region between 100 and 300 people. And then phase 3 is basically in sync with phase 1 and phase 2, but it's all about gathering more information, probably more insights and safety and effectiveness around the study within different populations. In this example, for it could be something around a new drug, and looking at a combination of doses and different mixtures or concoctions of placebo versus the main drug of interest or active ingredient. And that is about involving up to 3,000 people or more, and that will be again a mix of healthy population versus the so-called disease population, or the trigger group, I would like to sort of coin. And then there's the phase 4 of a clinical trial. So for drugs or devices, this takes place after the FDA approves their use. And FDA is something obviously in the US is very important to meet compliance. In England, in the UK, it's the MHRA, which is probably the equivalent, which is the Medicine, Health and Regulation Authority. So patient involvement and patient-centeredness, we hear, well, at least in academia and research, we know that these patient involvement, engagement, and centeredness, they're all kind of they all are terms that are synonymous really. But in terms of clinical trials, it's actually a very big thing. It's very important to get this right from the get-go really. And trialists, throughout time have improved ways and techniques to do this. But ultimately, it is about bridging that understanding that both the patients as well as the trialists actually have mutual goals and benefits. So what does it really mean? So in recent years, patient engagement in clinical trials has emerged as an increasingly important aspect of successful clinical trials. So from about 2007, inception of the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiatives, or CTTI, a multi-stakeholder engagement model, patients have been included serving on governance committee and project teams. That's very important because prior, I think when the new millennium clicked in around 2000, up to 2007, and even before then, clinical trials were very they were designed up to very well to the point where they needed patients involved, but then when they needed patients involved, it was more like a tick box exercise, but that's no longer the case. Every trial that is being prompted where patients are needed and involved, they are now pushing or encouraging in a very positive manner where they are actually working together. And I think that's fantastic. Sponsors, academics, regulators, and patients of primary goal of clinical trials is to have more rapid answers around research questions and deliver safe, effective treatments to patients. Patient engagement, again, is central to accomplishing this goal. The CTTI leadership has not only recognized the crucial role of patients needed and being involved within clinical trials, but also has made a deep commitment to help grow and shape the emerging field of patient engagement. So, co-developing clinical trials. What does that really mean, or what is that all about? So we talked a little bit about patient and public involvement, or PPI, in broad terms, but in terms of developing clinical trials, again, it's about having mutual goals. Patients it's about patients having an opportunity to work with professionals, and also professionals understanding patient involvement increases trial rigor. So trial rigor and integrity, because by understanding the real issues and concerns that patients have around particular areas of their health, for example, it could be physical activity, it could be medicine related, it could be managing, aspects of their lifestyle, whatever it might be. That by having, a co-development initiative, it actually adds more integrity to any proposed clinical trial, ensuring whatever is being trialed is assessed, is translatable and representative to the patient population. So you don't want people who are involved who do not have a particular condition to actually be involved in a trial that is to actually help or is being proposed to help a certain area or focus of health or disease. That would actually be completely, fallible. So you need patients and professionals to actually have transparency from the beginning. So in that regard. And all trial phases have elements of reporting and documentation so that where appropriate, any updates, amendments, errors are tracked and traced. And that's important because actually in certain networks and groups, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a few slides later, but the importance of this is very high because actually if you have patients involved in trial with trialists from the beginning, they're actually involved, actually helping to support the trialists, make some of these updates, and that's actually very interesting and very important. It is suggested that through co-developing clinical trials involving patients and professionals prompts quality of joined up aims and objectives, also addressing possible healthcare inequalities. And that is actually a very big thing because you could easily, trialists can struggle, actually have sort of almost a biased population, within their trials, which actually then skews the results or a particular intervention to support a certain population and not another population or a whole population with that particular disease. So it's very important to, important to have this um, uh, to co-develop these trials so it beats these so-called inequalities. Involving expert patients to co-develop rounded comprehension is key. This is important for clinical trials, providing trialists more positive experiences to help increase patient-reported outcome measures. And again, it is about having mutual understanding, which increases the positive experience. So just quickly on this slide, I wanted to introduce the UK Renal Trials Network. Again, it's still quite a relatively new and novel network in the UK, and basically any trials that are around renal or kidney health, whether it's an app or it's an intervention or medicine related, and it's and has a renal focus, then you first port of call for proposals could come through to the UK Renal Trials Network, and they have affiliation with the Kidney Research UK and part of the Renal Association. So it's becoming more established and very prominent. And the great thing about this particular network is they do have a patient panel as part of their work and effort. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's quite important to make mention that there's a real example here. So focusing on implementing guidelines. So there's quite a lot of literature out there in terms of what guidelines should have and implement as part of particular clinical trials and patient involvement and all surrounding engagement. But there's one paper that struck me actually, and I think is very interesting. It comes from Vale and their team. Was published 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago now. When patients, when participants get involved, reconsidering patient and public involvement in clinical trials at the Medical Research Council Clinical Trials Unit. And I would like to prompt encourage fellow colleagues or those who are involved in trials to actually look up this work because it's actually quite a good example of how you can focus elements of trials, implementing specific guides and key parameters and focuses where patient involvement is concerned. And then there's the NHS clinical trials a document and guide, which is also a good a prompt. And I would encourage audience to actually get onto these particular papers. So actually, what should best practice really look like? So we talked a little bit, I highlighted a little bit about the need or necessity really for patients and professionals to co-develop and kind of co-design or co-create efforts. But these are a few, I guess, key notes around best practice. It's about mentoring and training and patient sharing experience with trialists, and that should actually prompt inclusivity and empowerment, because actually it gives an opportunity for patients to actually highlight the real issues around a particular health complaint, or where they are compromised, and the trialists, or the clinical teams and academics who might be part of that network or team, they get to understand that that real reality actually, and that's very important. Patients and families require understanding of clinical trials, and best practice needs to provide guidance where involvement is needed. So, I talked a little bit about the CTTI initiative that happened in 2007. Prior to that, there was really not much understanding around involvement, and trialists would struggle to have a big enough numbers to have representative data for trials. So now guidance is time has moved on and guidance has improved, but actually now we need it's a bit more about education around the importance of having transparency, and trials in for understanding around trials. Sorry, so patients and carers understand their benefits, etc. Involving peer support groups and wider dissemination networks is key. So that way, more understanding around particular trials is disseminated more widely, and we're seeing a lot more groups around certain diseases and long-term conditions in online and on through social media, for example. And those groups are the populations that trialists actually need to make sure really that they are getting an understanding. Trial networks to have patient and panel members to increase involvement, and that is again kind of relatable to the UK Renal Trials Network, and I'm sure there's other good examples of similar networks across in different parts of the UK and in the US. Any clinical trial results, good or bad, need to be transparent and reported so patients have understanding of involvement. There is, I'll come on to it in the next slide, I think it is, but it's very important just to highlight here that again, in retrospectively, or in the past, whether a patient or a certain population, whether they were involved in a trial, and whether the results of that trial were good or bad, they would not necessarily get an understanding or an outcome of how good or bad their involvement was. It was, when they were particularly involved in the trial. So that actually has now changed, or is changing, so that patients and even the public, if they're involved in something, they should have transparency about that, and the advantages of their involvement. Co-developing should also lead to co-authorship of any trial research effort. And what I just want to highlight here is that if you have a patient, 2 or 3 patients who might be involved as part of the co-developing or co-creating team with a research network, or within a clinical trial network with academics or clinicians, then rightly so, they should be involved as co-authors on any final publication, if that cohort, if that study prompts real inclusion, and that's really what it should be about. So I wanted just to highlight a bit about ownership and empowerment. The National Institute of Health Research, Involve 2020, they have a document or sort of a framework of it's almost it is a little bit about best practice, but it's actually being prompted more like a framework of how to involve people in research depending on certain conditions, and that's really sort of a framework for both patients and professionals. And I wanted to allude to that because by having more empowerment on both sides, then actually both professionals and patients can take ownership of different aspects of a proposed areas of involvement in a trial. I also wanted to highlight the work of the Kidney Patient Involvement Network, or KPIN, and I think that they're doing great work about trying to prompt the understanding of patient involvement around kidney research generally, and actually that also follows on into areas of clinical trials as well. So that they're doing great work. There's also the Renal Patient Support Group, which has been going on for just over a decade now, and they've expanded quite in a wide range of areas, prompting awareness and research. And some of the work that more recent work they're doing now is about patient and public involvement in research, and doing fantastic work highlighting different areas of kidney disease. And I think that's really saying something when there hasn't been really that much understanding around involvement in the past, and now has moved on, and the RPSG is highlighting and emphasizing this fact. NIHR Involve, I mentioned about their particular framework about how to involve people in research. And for those who are in the audience from the UK perspective, for example, they are welcome to check out the NIHR Involve website and have a look at their different documents and guidances around patient involvement, because they really actually encourage using having that understanding to put together particular trials and particular applications. This is what we call the SWOT framework, and SWOT stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threat. So why I wanted to highlight this is because of basically the underlying principles of involvement, and where trials are important, and otherwise bigger other projects where patient and public involvement is needed. This actually is a good sort of framework that kind of can help understand what things, elements can surround strength, bring strength, can cause threats, bring opportunity, and prompt potential weaknesses. And I'd like to think that as a baseline framework, this is something that everyone could kind of refer to. You could just see there from the threat side of things. It's poor reporting can be is a potential threat, and I talked a little bit before about how if you've got bias, potential a population, and they're only within a clinical trial, and they're only from one group of population within that disease, and then it's going to skew the results for any clinical trial. So that would equate to poor reporting, and obviously potentially ethical breaches, and then those two things would then actually follow by practice. So those things are known as threats. Then we have things like opportunity, strengths and weaknesses. And I just wanted to highlight that this framework has been summarized in the work by Price in 2018, and I would again encourage the audience to check that work out. So really just some recommendations. So this again is taken this information or context is actually adapted from a paper by Patrick Lake from 2018, and basically the team talk about recommendations and splits that context and understanding into three parts. So there's recommendations for all stakeholders. And so I won't read all of this, but just to highlight that for stakeholders, one of the key things is probably is about building the trust required for successful partnerships by being transparent, trustworthy, following through commitments, and honoring confidentiality. For research and sponsors, industry and academia. So those audience members who are from this particular focus, one of the key things is about making sure that there's consistency, establishing guiding principles and clear lines of communication to facilitate a fit for purpose process for collaborating with teams, and obviously if you've got patients or public involved, then transparency needs to be with those, and we have to see them as colleagues and collaborators really, rather than basic service users. And then for patient groups, there's a few key points here, but I think one of the key ones here is prompting not just about involvement, but sharing experiences, delivering your expertise and assets to potential sponsors throughout the entire research and development process. And that can only really be realized where you have co-developing and co-creating efficiency from the start. But it's very important for patients to be involved like that and have that understanding. So those are just a few recommendations. So I guess there's some final points or conclusions. Understanding surrounding clinical trials has moved on dramatically, and things have become a little bit more transparent. But clinical trials should be available, and understanding around clinical trials should be available through online mediums attached to the National Health Service or NHS kidney care sites. So in the UK, we have various renal or kidney centres, and any centre that is potentially looking to involve or recruit patients with a particular issue or concern, and something is being trialed, then these sites need to make that aware, amongst the service users and the patients who would potentially benefit. Education surrounding trials from trialists who envisage patient involvement through research endeavours. Share best practice. So in one of the earliest talks about a little bit about co-creating and co-developing efforts and research, but it's also again about almost that education or mentoring and understanding of why there needs to be more joined up efforts between patients and professionals. That understanding should come from those who are, actually leading particular trials. Online snapshot videos from trialists would also help transparency of why studies are needed and why certain groups of patients are required in kidney care or kidney focused treatments. And it also must be appreciated that patients should be armed with appropriate context and information so that they are able to have engaging communication surrounding trials, increasing impact. So by both professionals and patients, coming together, working together, it not only helps join up aspects of the trial involvement and prompts the awareness, but it also actually increases and opens up dialogue around specific issues around kidney care, and that then prompts more engagement and communication, and that's really what we want for best practice around kidney care for everyone who is with kidney disease, and certainly that will help bring more transparency throughout. Just to say that this is the sort of so-called reading material, so to speak, for all the different slides that I talked through. And if this is made available, then feel free to sift through the literature. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muhammad, for your presentation, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.